I think there is a right and wrong side of the situation. There have been a lot of gatekeepers on this for 77 plus decades, and there are a lot of people that have been read in by the ICIG, that's the Intelligence Community Inspector General, and they are fully aware of what's going on behind closed doors in these special access programs. Some of these guys are morally obligated to do the right thing, which is what we're seeing from Chuck Schumer and Mr. Rounds. And then we're seeing the other side of that with Mike Turner and Mike Rogers blocking those things. I don't think they have a disclosure plan, because they haven't quite figured out everything. There are elements, certainly from the military at least, where they've had successful reverse engineering programs take place. But I think overall, how they would disclose this to 8+ billion people living on the planet right now, I just don't think that's in the dossier.
Today, we have a very special guest. We're talking with a fellow enthusiast. He goes by the name of Daniel Knightley. Daniel has followed the subject of disclosure of extraterrestrial aircraft and life on our planet very closely, especially as it relates to the government and how they bring out the information about disclosure. So Daniel, we want to welcome you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, we are excited to talk with you because I know you have quite a following and you have been putting out a lot of information, especially lately as it relates, as I mentioned, to the government and what they're sharing about the topic of disclosure. But first, I wanted to ask you, Daniel, how did you get started with this topic of disclosure and what made you so passionate about this?
Loaded question. You know what? It's funny. It goes back to 2023 during the situation with the Chinese balloon. I was watching it very closely. I was really intrigued as to what they were going to do with it. They ended up shooting it down. We saw that live on TV, a lot of people. And then there was all these reports right afterwards about all these little small objects that they started finding, 2 of which were in Canada and 1 over Lake Huron in Michigan. And I was like, what's that about? And I just was glued to the TV for like 2 or 3 days, just keeping an eye on all this stuff going, what is this? What? Okay. And then they shoot them down. And then all of a sudden there's no reports on the recovery, and I was like, okay, so all right, what's the findings here? What was this? And since then, I've just started doing some digging and realized that, hang on a minute, there's something not quite right here, which put me on this tyrannical path of trying to force disclosure on my own terms, which has been somewhat of a journey so far, learning a lot about people in the military, people from the 3-letter agencies and various heroes, I'd like to call them, that have come forward in good faith to divulge what they've learned from the intelligence community and the military about what's going on with UAP.
I think it's interesting. There's always something that triggers people to do a deep dive on this subject, whether it is a news report or they hear something from a friend. I know Tracy and I kind of started going down the rabbit hole on this topic several years ago. For me personally, and I've shared this story a couple times, it sounds a little silly, but Star Trek is what made me actually start going down the rabbit hole. I just, out of the blue, one day started watching it. I felt compelled to, and I'd never watched it or even thought of watching it prior to that moment. And I just couldn't get enough. I mean, once I started watching it, to me, it was like, wow, this is the truth. It just resonated for me. And I just knew, obviously, I know it's kind of fantastical and it's a story, but I think there's a kernel of truth in there. And, then I started reading more about Gene Roddenberry and how did he get the information that he was putting together to create this series? And that's fascinating in and of itself. But I think that there's always something that causes people to start looking more deeply at this subject. And I think right now we have a lot coming out in the media, especially as it relates, as I mentioned, to the government and the new laws that are being proposed, not necessarily approved quite yet. But I know we've had a few laws that have been proposed, such as the UAP Disclosure Act, and then Chuck Schumer has the Schumer Amendment. What can you share with us more about those that you've been learning through your research?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, that is kind of the bread and butter really for me in terms of actual pieces of legislation that is like literal proof that this is going on. And that's kind of my first point of call when someone wants to argue with me. I said, have you read SA 797? Have you read SA 2610? You might want to have a look. One of these documents mentions non-human intelligence 26 times. Someone might refer to a squirrel in that case, but no, I'm pretty sure they're talking about something else a bit more, important in this case. But it's something that I think you've got to be on the right side of. I mean, I think there is a right and wrong side of the situation. Have been a lot of gatekeepers on this for 77 plus decades, and there are a lot of people that have been read in by the ICIG, that's the Intelligence Community Inspector General, and they are fully aware of what's going on behind closed doors in these special access programs. And I think some of these guys are morally obligated to do the right thing, which is what we're seeing from Chuck Schumer and Mr. Rounds. And then we're seeing the other side of that with Mike Turner and Mike Rogers blocking those things. So it's a game of cat and mouse, clearly, and it has been proposed numerous times now in different forms, which just keeps getting denied or gutted, so to speak, which no one really at this point is surprised by. But I think that's because when you've been the gatekeeper that long for these things, you're not just going to turn over and go, yeah, sure, okay, you can arrest me, even though I've been holding this a secret from my predecessors and my successors, et cetera, for this long. They're not just going to be like, yeah, here you go, have it. It's going to be a fight, and it's a marathon, as many people have said. Lou Elizondo said that. David Grusch has said that. This is not a sprint. This is going to take some time. But that is why it's so important that we have this conversation. And that is why, especially with this legislation, we can clearly see that the government is not going to be the entity here that allows disclosure to take place. It's going to come from people like you and I. That's how it's going to happen. We're seeing the Sol Foundation. We're seeing Danny Sheehan and the New Paradigm Institute, who you've had on your show before. There's all these people that are setting up private setups for this stuff outside of the purview of government to make sure that we can get autonomy and push for disclosure. So, that's kind of what I've been pushing for some time now.
Absolutely. And, I know we asked Danny Sheehan this question when we had him on as a guest about why the secrecy? What is it about this topic that is causing everyone to be so hush-hush and also makes people seem silly when they bring it up? And I think when we interviewed him, his reference point was the technology. It really has to do with the technology that's being covered up because a lot of these private companies, as you referenced, are reverse engineering these pieces of technology, and there's money to be made, and that's really one of the main things, as always, right?
It's the main driving force behind this whole thing. As money makes the world go round. I'm sure everyone's heard that expression before, but it's I think that's primarily what it is, and also to have the one up on your adversaries. I think that's if you look at the military industrial complex, that's how it's basically been responding since the Second World War. Why should now be any different just because we're dealing with alien tech? Russia has their own program, so does China. But in this case, I do think the US is slightly further ahead than everybody else in terms of how successful they've been with reverse engineering some of these crash craft, or in some cases, I'm not sure if Danny shone some light on this, but I think in some cases they're actually bringing them down. I've heard quite often from people like Lou, where they've got the technology to do that already. So I think what we think is happening versus what's actually happening, they're probably still 20 or 30 years ahead in terms of what they've discovered already.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, I think it's probably more than that even. My guess is even to the tune of hundreds, if not longer, years ahead. And I just want to ask, because you did reference David Grusch and Lou Elizondo, and I know you referenced in one of your videos that you've been reading Lou's book, Imminent. I'm just curious, what's your opinion on both of them as whistleblowers coming forward? Because I think they're probably the most credible whistleblowers that we've seen come forward yet, which is really getting the attention of more people in the public to recognize that this is a legitimate topic to discuss. And some people do say they are disinformation, bringing disinformation. And I've heard that from several people as well, some of the naysayers. But what's your opinion on both of them, David Grusch and Lou Elizondo, especially as it relates to you reading the book that Lou wrote? Well,
I'll start with David Grusch, because obviously that's one of the main reasons, again, why I started digging into this. As far as I'm concerned, I think he's a hero. I think what he's done, he's very brave, given the pushback he's got from said agencies. But, he was a bit of a rogue in terms of how he approached it. No one saw him coming, which is why we moved the needle considerably for about 6 to 8 months when David Grusch came out with these allegations. He provided 11 hours of witness testimony after spending the last 4 years of his career gathering all this evidence from people, and then provided that to the ICIG, who responded by saying, this is, credible and urgent stuff. We need to deal with this now. So that, in terms of media coverage, though, I think it was quite poor, given how well done it was put together. I think Lou Elizondo kind of reignited that flame again, but I think his application was far more, I think he went through it a lot more tactful. So obviously the book was a portion of disclosure for him, or at least, coming forward as a whistleblower, but also his campaign to go to specific media groups to discuss what he's been doing, and also supporting David Grusch's allegations as well, saying he's a stand-up guy, that he spoke very highly of him. So I think those two together can be quite a good, dangerous combination, certainly for the gatekeepers at least, because what dirt do you have on Lou in this case? You heard what he'd been through with some of the things that people were doing to him and threatening his family, and living in a trailer and a hole for a toilet, that kind of stuff. It's nuts. But he knew that was going to be the outcome if he chose to do what he did, which he has done very successfully, by the way. He's been on a numerous amount of shows whereby people are sitting there going, am I really hearing this? Like, people are genuinely in shock, which is great. And the book is the commercial application. It's not the stuff that you and I are looking at every day. We've already read most of the stuff he's put in the book. But in terms of the average Joe that we spoke about at the beginning, that's exactly who he's targeting. And those are the masses. Those are the big numbers. So if those people are sitting down and reading that book and then seeing him subsequently on the news, I think it's a reinforcing factor, which is really important. So I think overall, I think they're both heroes. I think they're both very brave. And, as Lou says, look, it's not about my personal opinion. It's about the data. If the data's there and he's trying to show people, hands off. You look at the data. It's not about what he says. It's not about his opinion. So I think he's been very clear about that. I know that he was pressed on PBD recently, Patrick Bet-David's channel, about allegations from Dr. Greer and what he thinks of him as a disinformation agent. And he just simply said, look, I've provided all the evidence. Here's the stuff that I've been talking about. Here's the data. Let's look at this. Let's have scientists look at this. It's not about me. So I think he answered that very eloquently on the show. And it proves that, he's the right guy for the job right now.
And we actually had Stephen Bassett on, who is a DC lobbyist for this topic. And I asked him the question about David Grusch coming forward, and why wouldn't the government choose that moment to bring the disclosure forward? I mean, it seems like there's been a bit of a slow drip campaign anyway. So it seems like that would have been the perfect moment to say, okay, yes, we have not been bringing enough of this information forward. And now that this very credible witness has come forward, this is a tipping point to allow us to bring this information to the people. So what are your thoughts on that? Why would you think that the government didn't use that as an opportunity to bring this information out?
Honestly, I think we give too much credit to the secret, dark operations of how the government does things. And I think that they just weren't prepared. I don't think they were ready. And I don't think they have a disclosure plan, which keeps coming up in conversations I'm having with people, as well as sources that I have. They just don't have a plan for this because they haven't quite figured out everything in total. I think there are elements, certainly from the military at least, where they've had successful reverse engineering programs take place. But I think overall, how they would disclose this to 8+ billion people living on the planet right now, I just don't think that's in the dossier right now. And you can see, like, for example, if you look at AARO, which a lot of people are saying is a kind of a filter for disinformation and just a branch of the DoD to say, look, whatever information Kirkpatrick had, because we're all very clear on how everyone feels about Kirkpatrick, to be honest with you. And in terms of the information that they released and how poorly it was put together in that document, it's just embarrassing. And I'm just like, yeah, no, that's not going to fly with anybody. I think they underestimated not only the power of social media and the power of people's free speech, but the resilience that myself and you guys and everyone else in this space have towards BS. And I think they all got called out on it. It's like, no, sorry, we're not buying this. Like, you're going to have to try again. Same thing with who's the current director of NASA? Is it Bill something? I can't remember his surname. But he had a press conference and they had people asking him. James Fox asked him a question, and he just point blank shot him down. Said, "No, if we knew about this, we'd be telling you." I'm like, NASA knows a lot, and they're not saying much. Let's just put it that way. So does JPL, and they're just, again, you have to understand that these are branches of the government, and they will not. They are doing as they're told by the DoD. If they are told to keep shut, they will keep their mouth shut on these things. Yeah.
One step further, I don't think it's just the DoD. I think there's even a bigger entity at play. I don't even think it's any one government, a bigger entity just out there saying, pulling the strings, the puppeteers.
Oh, yeah. I completely agree with you. I think it's yeah. As you said, there are people, non-elected officials pulling the strings for sure on this.
And so to go to that, I'm all over the place here because I just was listening to both of you and I love you both already. But my feeling is as I just saw on your TikTok the other day, there's this thing coming at us that is course corrected.
Yeah, it's pretty alarming, actually. I would say that with that type of stuff, I think people really need to be clued up. And that was from a reliable source. And just to be clear, there was another video I had to follow up with on that, because there were, let's say, snippets and sound bites that were kind of missing from that. But I did refer people to the right place to watch the entirety of that video with I've got his name here right now, Professor Simon Holland and Patrick from Vetted. I just think that with that kind of stuff, it's so astounding, and it's something I was very hesitant to report on until I spoke to my sources first. And then, apparently that is a conversation that's going on in Congress, and they did have a private hearing on that stuff. So
I've heard that that object it's been spoken about by other people, other physicists and scientists as well for a while now. There's discussion that it's actually a large aircraft that is coming here. So that is frightening to think about, because it's something that we can't comprehend. I mean, we don't even have the confirmation that unidentified aircraft even exist, let alone all of a sudden this ginormous spaceship, which from what I'm being told, I want to say it's potentially the size of Earth. Like it would be like a planet coming into our solar system.
Ship. Yeah, you know what? At this point, after digging into all this stuff, I wouldn't be surprised to hear that. To be honest, nothing shocks me anymore when I hear. Certainly, when I was learning about collective consciousness, I mean, wow, all of that stuff is deeply embedded with the UAP phenomenon as well. So
absolutely. I mean, you can't have this conversation without bringing that subject up, because it's all intertwined.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's someone once said to me, I think it's the universe's way of expressing itself.
That makes sense.
Or allowing intelligent beings, or sentient beings at least, to communicate non-locally, because it knows how vast it is. Like, how weird is that as an analogy? Like, it knows how big it is, so it's provided a way of non-local communication, and it's expressing itself through us as a form of the human. So we're part of the universe expressing itself, which I thought was quite a beautiful term.
It really is. I mean, it kind of goes to the whole spirituality side of things, where we are all one. We are all connected. So that makes sense then in that case, that's a way that we can communicate with each other, whatever that whether that's the ether or whatever we want to call that. And then the question becomes, is that God, right? I mean, it's like the conversation has to continue into that direction, because you can't have like this conversation in a silo. It has to have the multiple pieces that all connect back together. And I think that's where, like, a lot of people, when they look at these topics, they look at them from one perspective, and they're not adding the pieces up and connecting all the dots.
No, they're not. They're just, and that's what you can't do. And that's when you start hitting walls. If you start applying walls to how you're going to learn about this, you're going to hit roadblocks. It's not going to work. It is a multifaceted phenomenon and issue, and it requires a multifaceted approach.
Along the lines of what you were saying earlier, I'm not sure if you have heard this, but I watch Gaia Television, and Cosmic Disclosure is one of the shows that I've always loved watching. And one of the guests that they've had is David Adair, but he recounts when he was interacting with an unidentified object that he actually physically was able to touch, and he said it had consciousness. The skin of the aircraft was conscious.
Yeah, it was alive.
It was alive, and it was a sentient being of itself, which actually makes sense if you think about it. They say when they go inside, there's no right. So the question is, well, how are they maneuvering these aircraft? Well, it's all through consciousness, because they're connected. They're all one. They're part of the same being. So anyway, that was just fascinating for me to learn that.
I think to be honest with you, I think that's eventually what we're going to figure out for ourselves at some point, that's how we can operate and function properly in space, is that these craft are in fact organic in nature, but that can survive in space. I think there's something to that. There's a lot of allegations about that, especially from Bob Lazar. I'm not sure if you guys have read much about him, but he talks about the skin of a craft being alive. I think it was a sport model he referred to, or another one. And when he touched the surface, it didn't feel like some clunky piece of metal. It felt almost like it was a skin, almost like a rubbery skin you get from a whale or something. I think it was
right.
one of the terminologies I've heard from someone.
His recount of what his experience has been from back when he was involved in these projects has stayed consistent through the years. So I believe his story. I think what he says is true and credible. And I know a lot of people try to make him out to be one of the disinformation agents, but I don't think that's the case.
No, I completely agree. Honestly, I'm in complete agreement there. I think there needs to be more coverage on him. I know that Jeremy Corbell did a couple of documentaries with him. And obviously George Knapp was the guy that broke the story and when he was working for the Vegas news network. I'm not sure if I think he still works for them actually. But yeah, it was very interesting to watch all that from the beginning.
Hey there, listeners. If you're enjoying the conversation today, we would love your support. Please hit that like button and subscribe to our podcast. Your engagement helps us bring you more inspiring content and amazing guests. Join our community and let's explore together. Thank you for watching, and now back to the show. So
there is a bigger picture to this whole thing. It's not just a craft that's coming to Earth, but it appears that it's course corrected in this direction at the very least. And that's something I can say with certainty. So whatever it is, there was some sort of not secret hearing, but there was a private hearing with select congressmen and women to discuss what the JWST has found. And this isn't the first time either. They keep seeing things and then deeming it a breach of national security, because with anything in the public sector, at least, that's funded, I'm not sure if you've seen the film Contact with Jodie Foster, but they have 24 hours to report on something that they find if it's legitimate. But if it's a breach of national security guidelines, they can waive that and go, no, sorry, we need to keep this in the skiff. We're not going to tell anyone about this because it's a bit of a problem for us. So, yeah, I mean, it's a lot to take in. I was skeptical about doing that to start off with, because that's, even for me, that's a bit far-fetched. I'm like, oh my God. I mean, I think people rush to the sort of fear factor of that whole thing and think about Independence Day. And I'm just like, no, let's not be so human, because, we don't know what that could be. It could be a very positive thing. We don't know. But yeah, I've got my ears on the ground on that one for any more information that comes out. So yeah, it's pretty spectacular news. That's why I've always liked to stick to the facts, and I like to give people legislative movements so that they're like, no, this is majority, Senate leaders doing this. It's like the third most powerful person in the Senate. Like, if someone like that is doing something, you pay attention. When you start saying policy, that's when you pay attention.
When it comes to credible sources, I feel like there's no more credible source than the clip from the SALT conference. And Colonel Karl Nell. Yeah.
Oh,
I mean, you cannot watch that and knowing what his background is, how credible he is as a resource in so high ranked in the military, to hear him say the words that he has, without a doubt, he is aware and knows of non-biological extraterrestrial entities that are on this planet, that have been on this planet. I mean, you can't listen to that and still deny the fact that this is the truth.
Yeah, I mean, the very problem with that, though, is that apparently you can. That's the issue, is that even
right.
Before, even with the level of credibility of someone like Colonel Karl Nell, you're still getting this cognitive dissonance amongst intelligent people that are in conflict with this because they never thought they'd be alive when it happens. That's why everyone's in so much shock about this, because you think about this, maybe in 5,000 years, not now. In 2024, we're seeing this now. Like, that is a big part of the issue here, psychologically, for people. And it's amazing, but it comes out in so many different forms. Like, some people will argue their point despite me giving them references to places where they can find the evidence. They'll sit there and go, nope, sorry.
But that's just plain ignorance, to not do your own research. I have friends that will say to me, well, prove it. Prove to me that aliens exist. Prove it. Show me one. And I'm like, I'm not going to show you an alien. I don't have access to show you a physical alien. However, I will show you where to do the research. And that's on you. That's your responsibility. It's not my job to show you this information. You need to be the one to do the work. So if you want to truly know the truth and believe, you have to go down that rabbit hole yourself, and you've got to do the research yourself. I can point you in the right direction. I can show you what I've researched that shows me that it's true, but you have to do the work yourself.
I'm in complete agreement with that. It's also the stigma associated with this topic, which, by the way, was very successfully put in place by the military in the 1950s. So that stigma that program has done so well to keep people off this topic for 65, 75 years. now that we're living in a world where things are being more widely accepted from our generation, people aren't tolerating that anymore. We're seeing people in high positions like Senator Chuck Schumer, like Mike Rounds, going, no, sorry, I've seen enough proof from everyone. We need to push this through. So that's what we need. The stigma is slowly dying down, and luckily, the one hidden card we've had this entire time is social media.
Yeah.
I think without social media, if this was in the 90s, this would have been put to bed very quickly. But the fact that we've got access to information so quickly and it gets out so fast, they can't put a bottle on that, and that's going to work in our favor.
Right. Yeah. And I really do think that the majority of the public actually does believe that there's life outside of this planet. I mean, even when I do talk with my friends, as much as we joke about it and they make their little, puns and jokes, when we have a serious conversation and I really do start explaining to them what the facts are, they always end up saying, yeah, I think that there's probably something out there. I mean, why wouldn't there be? We can't be the only beings in this entire universe. I mean, that's pretty arrogant to think that way.
Yeah, it's so big, it's ridiculous. It's insane.
And it's so I actually think that a lot more people believe that than what the consensus says. However, I think because this will change every aspect of our lives. I mean, literally every single aspect. I mean, it will change. Obviously, religion will be most impacted, I think. The financial sector, food distribution, what we eat, how we interact with each other, socialization. I mean, there's just so many aspects of what will change. And I think that's where a fear comes in for a lot of people because they're afraid of the unknown. They don't know, well, what's going to happen? Will my life be disrupted then? What if I can't take my kids to soccer on the weekend and go to the grocery store and go to a barbecue on the weekend? It's like, okay, well, you may still be able to do those things, but you may actually be able to do them in a better way once the new technology is revealed, because this information is finally presented to us. But it's like people don't want to change because they're scared of what change might bring to them. There's somebody that I research who has talked about this and has said that they had a neighbor that they discussed this with, and the neighbor was so against this information coming out that when the person said, well, why? I don't understand why you feel this way. They said, because I like my life the way it is. I don't want it to change. I like that I'm married, I have kids, I have a beautiful home, we drive nice cars. I know that this information will change all of that, and I don't want to change. But it's like, okay, I get that. But you need to also be open to what the change might bring in a positive way. You're just looking at it through a negative lens. There's a potential of things being great, being amazing. That means there may be, free energy. We may have anti-gravitic technology that gets presented to us. This potentially could stop wars. Our food could be no longer tainted with the pesticides that they're currently putting on our food. We could be eating all organic, all natural foods that allow us to live longer. I mean, there's so many benefits that this could bring. So anyway, that's my opinion on it.
No. I was going to say, to go back to what we were saying, though, and this is like a parallel universe that we're all discussing besides the UFO phenomenon, is the mindfulness, the opening of the fifth or fourth dimension, where your higher being is open to new things. And we all know that not everyone's like that. That goes back to the base level of humanity being, I don't like change. I don't want change, like Tara was just saying, and that higher level of thinking and being open. And somehow we have to segue that into this.
I think you're spot on there. I think that there are levels of consciousness and awareness, and everyone has a different level. And that's subconscious. It's not even something they choose. I just think some people are born to be more open-minded than others. And I think there's a bit of evolution in there as well. I think that's some people just being a bit further ahead of the curve than most others. And when you see those people, the Elon Musks, maybe the Jeff Bezoses, maybe the Richard Bransons, they tend to stand out a bit more than the average Joe. But like that whole thing, I think, is going to culminate in a group of followers that will realize, oh, this is a transition. I do need to be more mindful. I do need to maybe start meditating a bit more every night. Maybe that is the normal part of the human experience. And so a lot of people say that intelligence comes from academia. I don't believe that. I think there's an element that involves collective consciousness that gives you that anyway, that has been shown time and time again when people have done this. They've had access to numbers and algebra and understanding further maths and things like that nature. I was like, how the hell has that happened? How have they been able to tap into that? Because everything you thought about has already been thought about before, and it's there and available if you can tap into it.
Daniel, getting back to some of the research you've done, I watched one of your reports and I was really surprised because this is something I hadn't heard, but you talked about how the United States police chiefs had issued a US guidebook that they published on how to handle UAPs. So I feel like that right there, if that's not a form of disclosure, I don't know what is. Like, why would there need to be a guidebook on how to handle this situation if this didn't exist at all? So can you tell us a little more about what you found out about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I can't remember the name of the town, but it was I believe it's in Charlotte. And it was the chief of police there. And he was basically saying, look, we've released this book. It's gone to all the major cities across the United States. And it's a guidebook for officers that are on the streets to know what to do in the event that there's a UAP incident. So he emphasized that, it's primarily for safety, so they know the protocol that's in place. But also for police helicopters, when they're in the air, if they have an incursion, they know what to do. I think that that's quite substantial, and it's amazing that something like that didn't get covered by nationwide news. Yet the only people covering it, once again, is News Nation. With their motto, providing you with fact-driven, non-biased coverage. I love that little tagline they do at the end of each one of their little news bulletins. But it just shows that the private sector, and you could call it, because police departments operate independently from one another, but you could call it that. If you've got a sheriff of a town that decides to do that, it means that they're taking action despite, government resilience. So it's happening anyway. So a lot of people said disclosure started back in 2017, and that we're going to see things coming from different areas to effectively meet at a junction. You got stuff from the police, you got stuff from the military, you got stuff from the private sector, you got stuff from the Soul Foundation, the New Paradigm Institute. There's all these things popping up, and I think that's just one area, one arm of many that are to come. So I didn't get it. I know there was a link flying around in terms of the information as to what was in the booklet. I think it was like 9 or 10 pages worth, but it's just instructions on what to do, which is incredible to see.
We'll have to see if we can find that and put it in the description of this video, because that would definitely be interesting to take a look at. And I do think it's probably very necessary, because there have just been so many reports in the news lately. For us, we're here on the West Coast in California, and we hear it all the time. I mean, I think this is a hotspot in this area for UFO activity. And I was just kind of curious, what is it like for you? I know you're there in the UK. Do you have any reports that you're seeing coming through about UFO activity in your area? What is it like in other countries? Because we're only really hearing about our own country. So I'm just curious to see what you're hearing.
I think what's really interesting, I mean, the biggest one was Rendlesham Forest. I'm not sure if you've read about that one, which there's been a lot. There's been a lot of documentaries and stuff on that. But that doesn't really happen in the UK. And I think it's primarily to do with the way the government's run. I mean, you've got, in America, it's a bit more open to suggestion with the way your policies work, which is why people always say, why are all the aliens landing in America? No, they're not. It's just that the local governments are dictating.
We're just friendlier here. We put out cookies for them. We only have cookies and milk, so I mean, I don't know what you guys are doing.
Like I said, I just think it's to do with the government itself. I mean, there are countries around the world that are very transparent. I mean, Brazil's very transparent about this. Mexico's very transparent about this stuff. Chile, Argentina, China's very transparent. They're very transparent about what they find. You don't always see the news because it's not worldwide, but it's, they're very open about this stuff. It's only, dare I say, Western nations are a little bit tight-lipped. And when I say that, I'm referring to, maybe let's say Canada, you don't hear much, and various other places across, Western Europe. But in England itself, no. Not many. I mean, there's been a handful, but it's not something that the news will cover because, again, the stigma associated with it, they're not going to touch it.
I also am curious what your thoughts are on this. It seems that the United States are the ones that are going to have to be bringing disclosure forward. And I brought this up to Steve Bassett as well and asked him this question. Why is that? Why is it that no other country has come forward with this information first? Because it would seem to me that this would be a power play. This would allow whatever country that comes forward with the legitimate, open disclosure announcement, that this would put them in a position of power. So what are your thoughts on that? Why do you think no other country has decided to do this?
I think this comes down to leading countries of the world. As far as we're concerned right now, in 2024, America represents the free world. So there is a moral obligation and responsibility that comes with that. If anything were to happen, it would be the US that would do it. And that's just based on responsibility. They know that they would have to be the one calling the shots because they probably had the most money invested in this. I mean, David Grusch attested to this in the hearing last year. There are billions and billions of dollars of misappropriated funds where the DoD didn't pass their audit. And he gave the name of the account where all that money was going to fund these operations. So in terms of why they would be the first, that's because they probably are further ahead than anybody else. I don't think, if you look at how, for example, there was a great documentary done by James Fox about the Varginha in Brazil. I'm not sure if you've seen that, but at the end of that, they had an unidentified US aircraft come and extract that craft and take it back to the US. So there's a company or an organization called Office of Global Access. It's probably the most private organization that deals with crash retrieval programs. And what they do is they basically provide contact for, let's say, tier 1 forces like SEAL Team 6, SAS, SBS, that kind of stuff. And they tell them, look, this is what you've got to capture, this is where you've got to go, this is how long it's going to take. And effectively what they do is they bring it to one area where they pull the stuff apart, ground zero being, let's say, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in this case, or Groom Lake, or S4 in Area 51. There's so many places that they can take this stuff and then basically continue to do their research in private without being interfered by any sort of third party in that way. So it's a very well-oiled system. And, when you've got tier 1 forces dealing with this stuff, I'm surprised some of these guys haven't come out actually about it, but it's a legitimate organization and they've been doing it for a long time. So they know what they're doing pretty much.
There's a lot of things that we would not know if it wasn't for social media. For good or bad or the ugly of social media, it definitely gives more information to the world that we wouldn't normally have. The things that normally they would get away with, whoever they are,
they're not getting away
any part of the world, it's not going to happen anymore. No. There's just too many eyes. It's Big Brother. It's 1984. It's coming.
Yeah,
truly.
Yeah, you're right. It plays a vital role in all of this. And when I watched Lou go on PBD, PBD, I always get his name, Patrick Bet-David, and Joe Rogan, he said at the end of both of those interviews that you yourself, Joe, and you, Patrick, have a huge responsibility here because it's the first time in history that you're getting private individuals that are getting more views on a video than Fox News and CNN combined. So these guys don't realize the power they have. In terms of, they could sway public opinion on politics if they wanted to, but when you start generating those kind of numbers, it becomes more of a responsibility, and that's something I've come across a few times now. Not so much when I first started, but now people are like, oh, I don't appreciate you saying that. You've got a responsibility to be a bit more careful with how you say it. And that happens a lot more when you have more people with eyes on the target, but also when you're eloquent in the way that you approach this stuff, because they trust you because you're not one of these media groups that are trying to control the narrative. Do you know what I mean? You're just another person that's just trying to get the information out, which I think is a vital key point in all of this stuff that we're doing. It's really important what we're doing here, seriously.
I agree. And just going back, Daniel, because I know you've done so much research on this topic already. And I know you've talked also about what the micro and macroeconomic consequences are of this information coming out. What are your thoughts in terms of how this information will impact Wall Street and the financial implications of this?
I mean, where do you start? I mean, since Colonel Karl Nell, when he had the SALT conference in New York, there have been a lot of discussions at, big financial firms, investment companies. These guys have to think 20, 30 years ahead. So everything at this point is a possibility. If this is something that's being done, which Colonel Karl Nell attested to, that, Chuck Schumer's involved in writing legislation on this, finance people they're very smart people. They're going to look into this and go, okay, is this a lie? Is this a site? What is this? So, I've got friends that work in the financial sector here in the UK, and there's even stuff being talked about on Liverpool Street, which is the London version of Wall Street. So it has had a profound effect amongst certain groups of individuals, and I would say that those groups are going to be, first to the key, pretty much. I mean, if there's a mutual fund that involves UAP at some point, I'll be all about it. Do you know what I mean? But it's just something they have to think about. So
maybe we should start that.
Oh yeah,
UAP Bitcoin.
Yeah,
the UAP coin.
Yeah. I think it's all perfectly plausible, and it's something that they've got eyes on the target. So there will be some discussion somewhere in some investment firm or hedge fund about what are we doing about when this stuff does become public. How do we get this technology out? Let's talk with Boeing. Let's talk with Lockheed Martin. Let's talk with Skunkworks. How are we going to capitalize on on this tech? Because there's going to be tech that's going to come out that will be available to the public, and they have to figure out a way of putting a value on this stuff. They have to. That's part of the disclosure effort. That's whether it's a black swan event or not, it has to happen.
Absolutely, yeah. I think there's so much that is going to change, and people are unaware of what's coming, but I also think it's going to be good. I mean, I think there's going to be some good changes coming for the better. So we just have to be open-minded to that. And speaking of changes, I know you've also done some research and heard about a recent discovery that the James Webb telescope has come upon. So I'm curious if you could share a little bit more with us about that.
Basically, I think what's happening here is that, and this is from my source, but that they keep having these classified hearings on the JWST, which people are a little bit surprised by because they thought it was a public project. So they're like, what are all these private missions that this thing's doing? Isn't it supposed to be for the public to have a look? These are taxpayers. This is taxpayers' money. It took $10+ billion to get this thing up into space. It's the size of like 2 football fields. It's huge. So like the stuff it's seeing is changing the way we understand the universe, and a lot of that stuff is being filtered. So what happens is that when anything's ever processed, it goes through a line of filtration through peer review. So there will be scientists and various other moderators to look at that and go, yeah, look, we need to get rid of that. We can't have people see that. Okay, can we pass this? No, we can't pass it. Get rid of that too. So the end result of what you see isn't what it's been taking pictures of. It's talking about exoplanets. I'm hearing, rumblings of lights on different, planets that aren't even that far away. So a lot of this stuff, I guess you have to be careful with the context, because we need to understand what it means by light. It could be methane gas. It could be like reflection from its own sun or something. We don't know. But there's a lot of stuff that keeps coming up with JWST specifically that I think is defying what we currently understand about our surroundings, which I think is the most important part about that whole thing.
What are your thoughts on the secret space program? So there's a program that's been talked about that supposedly is out there allegedly as a program that has been in effect for quite some time without the public knowing. One of these, black projects in the government, these secret projects, where we actually have soldiers already on other planets. We've already actually set up colonies and societies on other planets, including the moon and Mars. And that information has not been given to us in the public quite yet, but that information is obviously, we've got to go through this disclosure first to even let people know that there's alien life before we can then drop the bomb that there's actually people on other planets. Yeah. So have you done any research on that topic, and what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, look, again, this stuff is so out there, and a lot of people will just go, wait, what? Like, when you look at that stuff. But there was a guy that I found out about called William Mills Tompkins, and he has a book called Selected by Extraterrestrials. Now, this guy, I'm halfway through the book, and it's just, for the life of me, I can't get past what this man's talking about. I mean, I have heard that they have tried to wipe this guy from Wikipedia. They don't want people researching this man because of the things he did for the Navy specifically during the late 40s and 50s. And also I think he worked with Lockheed Martin and a bunch of other, I think McDonnell Douglas is in there too. But he was tasked with designing some of these ships that they wanted to get out into space, which is just so beyond. Again, it's very hard to track valuable information on this man, because as I say, there's an effort to get rid of him online, but there's another guy called Gary McGinnon that hacked NASA about 23 years ago, and they did an exclusive documentary on BBC back then on him. The Americans wanted to have him extradited back to the States. They wanted his rear end behind jail for the rest of his life, but he managed to remain domiciled in the UK. I think he ended up living in Scotland on house arrest for about 5 or 6 years or something like that. But he basically found a way to get into back-end systems and found, Excel spreadsheets of non-terrestrial officers and non-seafaring vessels like the HMS Helicopter and USS Helicopter and USS Curtis LeMay, two of which are ships that are non-seafaring. We're talking about spaceships here. So, and those are claims that he made. That can be researched. That's not coming from me. So when you hear about things like that, the thing that springs to mind immediately is Stargate Atlantis, quite literally. The way that TV show goes is that they've got an entire operation where they figured out how to use zero-point energy, but they call them zero-point modules in Stargate, and they're traversing across another galaxy and doing all these crazy things. So we could have a space force already that's doing these things, and I'm perfectly and completely open to the possibility that is something that's going on out there with all the tech that's been successfully reverse engineered. The thing is about this is that there are, again, it's a multifaceted approach, because you've got all this stuff going on. You're talking about drip feed information to people so they don't have ontological shock. Certainly to religious groups that are extremely disciplined with their faith. You can't show that to religious fundamentalists. They won't know what to do with it, because it defies everything that they've been brought up on. I mean, some people die under their religion still. That's still happening across the world. So again, you've got the elements of education as well. So I think Danny Sheehan talked about this, but there are university degrees that are going to be available soon to discuss the UAP issue. There are going to be things that people can go to school for. Now, what frustrates me is that Star Trek didn't happen 20 years ago, because if it did and it was really happening, I would have loved to be a part of a civil academy that's entire function was to discover this and do it in a team environment. If I knew that this was available as a degree at school, I would have done it hands down. I would have had a very different career path. And that's the problem, is that there are people out there like me that would have done exactly the same thing. So there's people that aren't in the military that would have gladly given their lives to discover this, to be on the frontier of this, and to learn about this from an educational perspective, all the way up to, PhD level, if it would be available. And it will be available at some point when disclosure happens. They're looking at that. They're looking at that as an educational system, which is just fascinating.
It really is. I think there's just so much to learn here, and I think the educational system will change once this information comes out. The way people learn, how they learn, what they learn. I mean, there's just so many changes that are coming down the pipeline. I'm excited for all of it, and I just love having these kinds of conversations. And you have been amazing. We just appreciate your time today, Daniel. And I know that you're very popular on TikTok, and you're constantly putting out content to share and spread this word, to let people know about the truth of what's going on here with disclosure. Can you just share with people what your handle is on TikTok so they can look you up?
Absolutely. So it's Daniel Knightley. That's KNIGHTLEY. I'm just on TikTok, and the reason for that is because there isn't really a voice on TikTok to guide that demographic to the right people on YouTube, so that they can keep up to date with all the current affairs on UAP. But yeah, I've been doing this since 2023, since the Chinese balloon. I've been covering all the legislative movements, all the stuff in politics, and following some fantastic people in this space that are trying to push for disclosure. And just as a reminder for people to understand, this is our 21st century version of the Emancipation Proclamation. That's what this is. Just like what Lincoln tried to push through with slavery back in the day, that's what this is today. There is the right and wrong side to this. You want to be on the right side of history when this thing passes. There are people on the wrong side, there are people on the right side. This is literally good and bad. So I'm not going to have some arrogant general tell me or you about the reality of what's really going on. I'm not going to have some guy decide my fate and tell me about my surroundings. And I don't think anyone should accept that at all. Everyone has a right to be free and to understand what they're surrounded by. But I do have a bit of a name call here of people I want to just call out that I think people should be looking at. So if that's okay, I could just run down a list of names just for people to take a look at online and learn more about this. So I'll start with, it's not in any particular order, but we've got Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet, we've got Colonel Karl Nell, we've got Bob Lazar, David Grusch, Lou Elizondo, Dr. Stephen Greer, Danny Sheehan, Hal Puthoff, who's basically the grandfather of this stuff. And I think is very close to the floor of what's going on in terms of discovery. Commander David Fravor, Ryan Graves, George Knapp, Nick Cook, Lester Nair, Christian Harloff, Pavel on Psychoactivo, Patrick from Vetted, Professor Simon Holland, Jacques Vallée, who actually someone played him in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. He was the French guy that was running the show. So that was based on him being on set for that. with Steven Spielberg, Steve Bassett, Ross Coulthard, Jeremy Corbell, Chris Mellon, Billy Carson, Jesse Michaels, and then Jay from Project Unity. All of those people I've mentioned are people in the space that are trying to help and push for disclosure, and have basically taken a concerted effort to give out what they can in terms of information on the topic. And they're doing their best to get people to learn more about this so that we're all kept in the loop and not shocked when ET shows up at the front door. So yeah, shout out to all those guys. I think they're all heroes.
Absolutely. And we've had a few of them as guests as well. And you can actually add our names to that list because we are also very passionate about this topic. And we definitely want to help bring disclosure to the people and bring this subject to those who either don't know about it or were unaware or just want to learn more about it. We thank you so much, Daniel. I know you're working so diligently and so hard to bring this information out, and we appreciate it very much. And we just want to say thank you for your time today and sharing the information that you have. So thank you very much. We appreciate you.
Pleasure, guys. Thank you very much. All the best. Stay safe. Thank you.